Hello, my name is Tessa McBurney, and I'm the Atlantic Bat Conservation Project Technician with the Canadian Wildlife Health Cooperative Atlantic Region. And today I'm going to be giving a short introduction to Spectrogram software, or more specifically, the Kaleidoscope software provided by Wildlife Acoustics. So first I'm going to show you how to download this software if you don't already have it on your computer. So I'm just using the Google search engine or search bar here. So in the search bar, you can type Wildlife Acoustics, and that will bring up some different options. You can select the first option, the one at the top, wildlifeacoustics.com. Alternatively, you can just type that in the bar at the top of the page, wildlifeacoustics.com. And that will bring you to the Wildlife Acoustics website, which you can see here. So now you will click on the My Account button at the top of the page. So if you don't already have an account with Wildlife Acoustics, you will have to create one before you can download the software. You can see I already have an account set up here, but you should go down to the Request Account Reset Password button below and just click on that to create an account. So here you will have to type in the email address you want associated with the account. And then just click on the box here to accept the terms of use. And then select the red Create New Account button below. So when you do this, you should receive an email to the email address you listed in the box here. So it might look something like this, Wildlife Acoustics New Account Confirmation. And then you'll have to click on the link in the email to confirm your email address and proceed with the next steps of setting up your account, like creating a password. So this link is expired, so I can't show you these steps here. But if you click on the link and follow those steps, you should be able to create your account fairly easily. So once you do that, you can go back to the Wildlife Acoustics website and go to My Account again. And that will bring you to the login page. So type in the email address that is associated with your Wildlife Acoustics account and the password you created, and then click on the red login button. Okay, that will bring you to your My Account page. So now you can go to Resources at the top of the page and select Downloads, which should be your first option in the dropdown. And that will bring you to this page here. So we are interested in the Kaleidoscope software, so we're going to select that product here on the left, Kaleidoscope. And that will bring you to the Downloads page. So it does say Kaleidoscope Pro Analysis software at the top, but it will also allow you to download the Kaleidoscope Free Viewer, which is now called the Kaleidoscope Lite software. So you will have to first pick your OS, so select that red Pick OS button on the right. And now you will pick your OS or your operating system, so the one that you have on your own computer. So I have a Windows, so I'm going to select that, but potentially you have a Mac, so there's an option for that as well. So next to Windows, I'm going to select the red View button. Great. So now you can go to download version. So I would recommend downloading the latest version, which is always going to be specified next to the number in brackets with latest versions. You can see you can download some of the older versions as well, but you should download the latest version. So select that, and then you check this box below, and then you should be able to select the download button here. So I'm not going to go through all of the steps after that because I already have this software on my computer, but you should just be able to follow the usual download prompts and the prompts for installing software on your computer. So just follow those instructions and then you should be able to download Kaleidoscope software and have it on your computer. So once you do that, if you can see here, You should have this launch Kaleidoscope button as an option that if you double click on it, you can then open Kaleidoscope software. So it should just be noted now that there are many great software options available for reading acoustic data, and that includes NABat, Analog Insight, backhaul identification, and Kaleidoscope, among other kinds of software. So each program has its strengths and weaknesses for analyzing bad acoustic data. So if you are purchasing software and not relying just on free software, please do your research and select the program that best suits the needs of your project. For the purposes of this training guide, we had to select a single program as an example for practical reasons. So thus, only Wildlife Acoustics Kaleidoscope software will be described in this video. So this software program was chosen because it does have a free version available. It is able to analyze files using both full spectrum and zero cross analysis, which I won't get into now, but that is covered in great detail in our guide. And this software does also have a statistically based auto identification option that can be purchased as well, if that's of interest. So please just keep that in mind. There are other options out there. So the Kaleidoscope software has two parts, the converter and the viewer. So if you click on your desktop shortcut, this will open the Kaleidoscope converter. So I'll just show you what that looks like now. So there you go. That's the Kaleidoscope converter window. So we won't be going through the steps to fill this out right now. That is something that will be covered in a later video when you are creating metadata for your files. It will be necessary to select some options on here. So you can check out that video for more information, but I just wanted to show you how to open it. So to open the Kaleidoscope viewer window, you can just, I will show you here. So you should be able to just double click on any of your audio files. So if I do that, that opens the viewer window here. So the first time you do that, it may not be an automatic option on your computer to use Kaleidoscope because it is an audio file. You may have other software that are used to automatically open audio files on your computer. So to do that, if it doesn't automatically open in Kaleidoscope, you can right click, go down to open with, and if Kaleidoscope still isn't an option here, you can choose another app. Kaleidoscope's an option for me here, but if you still don't have that as an option there, you can scroll through. If you're not seeing it, select more apps. If it's still not there, you'll want to look for another app on this PC. So on my computer, my Kaleidoscope software is under program files, but you may have to go back to local disk C and go under program files times 86 if you're not finding it in program files. It just depends on your computer. So you'll want to find Wildlife Acoustics, the folder that says Wildlife Acoustics, and then Kaleidoscope. And then if you select kaleidoscope.exe and open, that will then open the file using Kaleidoscope. And you should have the ability to save that as an option for future use so you can more easily open files using Kaleidoscope software after that. So just make sure, like I said, I won't go through in detail using the Kaleidoscope converter right now, but just do make sure that when you're looking at BAT files, you always are using BAT analysis mode. So I'm just gonna draw attention to that now, but more details will be covered in a later video. Okay, so right now we're going to look at the Kaleidoscope viewer window and what that represents. So I just opened an audio file like I showed you. So what does this show you? What are you looking at? So you're looking at a spectrogram. So it's an image of sound. And the Kaleidoscope viewer window has time on the x-axis. So you can see here it's in seconds, but it can go into milliseconds as you either zoom in or zoom out on that axis. And then the y-axis is in kilohertz. So the y-axis, sorry, is the vertical axis, and then the x-axis is the horizontal axis. So you're looking at kilohertz and time, basically. Okay. So if you hover your mouse over the spectrogram part of the software, you'll see these white lines appear, like kind of like a target across. So if you right click on the mouse button, you can actually place horizontal lines on the spectrogram, which can be helpful for data analysis. So for example, when I'm looking at files, I often will right click and put a line at 40 kilohertz and then one at 20 kilohertz. And this helps me screen high and low frequency bats in Atlantic Canada. I won't go through detail what that means now, but you can look at our guide again for more information. But this just shows you how to place those lines. If you want to move a line, you just have to select your new location. I can't line that up super well. And you can place another line, but you can see your first line disappears, so you can only place 2 lines at a time. It may also be helpful just to use that line and place it at the bottom part of your call to see if your calls are consistent. So there are lots of different ways you can play with that, but that's a useful tool. And just to remove those lines, you're just going to double right click, and there, your lines are gone. So I'm just going to replace those lines because I like having them there to look at. But it's up to you if you find them useful or not. So now I'm going to go through some of the different buttons with various functions in the Kaleidoscope viewer. So it is important to experiment with these buttons and just determine what settings work best while interpreting the data. Some of the settings is just up to personal preference. Additionally, you will want to switch between buttons to get a better understanding of the file being analyzed, so to get a complete picture of the file. So you will want to use some of the functions, the different functions, to look at the same file, like switch between different functions. There is also a list of keyboard shortcuts for some of these buttons that you can find at the back of our guide in one of the appendices. So first, we're just going to look at the toggle zoom buttons. So you can find these both on the X and the Y axis, or the horizontal and vertical axis. So let's look at the X axis first. So if you press the plus, that allows you to zoom in. And whenever you hover over a button, you can see it also tells you what the button does. So that's very useful. So by clicking on the plus button, I can zoom in, which can be useful. And on the minus button, I can zoom out. I can also do that on my y-axis. So zoom out, you're getting quite a different picture. Or sorry, zoom in and then zoom out by hitting the minus button. So obviously you'll want to select an axis that works best with your file. So you'll see this gray space here that just indicates that that is beyond the recording settings you had set for this file. So we do specify recording settings on our detector that we don't necessarily record frequencies above a certain kilohertz. So at that point, the file turns gray and we don't see anything after that. And the gray over here at this end just shows that the file isn't any longer. That's the length of the sequence you recorded. So I typically would keep my y-axis around 120 kilohertz. That's really the maximum we'd see with our bat species in Atlantic Canada. And the x-axis will change depending on how you're looking at the file. So I won't describe that really in detail now because it depends on another button setting. The other option here, you can see this square. So this will ensure that the whole file is seen on your screen at one time if I select that. So you can see if I zoom in, I can't see the whole file at once. I have to scroll using this gray bar at the bottom to see the whole file, right? But if I hit that little gray square, it pops the whole sequence onto my screen. So I can't move that bar anymore. I'm seeing the full picture. And you can do that on the Y axis as well. But like I said, I usually keep the Y axis around 120 kilohertz. And so when you click that button, it should, if your detector setting is around 120 kilohertz, it should basically look the same anyway. So those are your toggle zoom buttons. You do have shortcut keys for those buttons, again, that you can check out in our guide. Okay, so the next buttons we're going to look at are the display adjustment sliders. You can see there are two, one here and one here. So the one on the left controls the brightness of the spectrogram. So you can see it's going to go brighter or darker, depending on how you slide that. If you increase the value to a positive integer, so anything above 0, it will better allow you to see the high frequency parts of the call that don't show up in zero cross. So I won't go into zero cross in detail, but the white and purple dots right now you're seeing are zero cross, and then you see as I slide that button up, you're getting this green or yellow or orange or red, but this light kind of around that white and purple, and that's showing the full spectrum analysis view. So by doing that, I can see these upper ends of the call that I can't see if I slide that down. So you're losing part of the call if you're sliding to the negative end. So I typically would ensure that I can see those upper ends of the call, but it is a balance because you don't want too much of this fuzzy noise in the background either. So I might keep it somewhere around here, which you're still getting some noise on the bottom, but I can see those upper frequencies quite well. And so this may need to be adjusted per call depending on the quality. So you'll be using that slider fairly regularly. The slider on the right controls the contrast. So depending on how fuzzy the spectrogram appears, you'll generally slide this towards the right, so towards the -1. You generally don't want it down here kind of below -50 because again it becomes unclear. So you can slide it up, but again if you slide it up too far you lose some of those higher frequencies. So it is again a balance. So maybe I'd keep it somewhere around here for this file. Okay, so now we're going to go through this series of buttons here on the right. So the first button is the toggle inverse video button. So this just simply changes the background of the spectrogram from black to white. So right now I have it on the black setting, and if I click on that button, it changes to the white setting. I can change it back to black. I prefer black. I find it easier to look at. It's not as hard on the eyes. And it's typically the standard, but if you are preferable to the white, feel free to use that option. But when you're looking at a lot of calls, that can be pretty intense on the eyes. So it's up to you though. This next button here, this toggles the waveform log linear view of the red oscillogram at the top of the viewer. So this up here, this red is your oscillogram. For our purposes, you don't really have to worry about that, but we typically keep it on log view, which is the setting that you can see here now with the 0, and it goes up in positive integers and then negative integers. So if you hit that button, it will switch to linear view, which isn't overly helpful. It's just a giant red bar, but you can see there are different units on the left, so I like to keep it on the log view here. But like I said, you don't have to worry too much about that. The next button over controls the full spectrum on and off. I won't be describing the difference between full spectrum and zero cross in detail in this video, but it is described again in our guide, so you may want to read more about that. I'm just showing you how to turn it on and off here. So like I said, the full spectrum you can see would be the light colors like the green, yellow, red, and orange, the brightness behind those white and purple dots. So you can turn that off if you just want to look at the file in zero cross. So the white and purple dots here are zero cross. So you can look at the file that way, or you can look at it also having the full spectrum there. So some individuals do find it easier to go through files quickly when it just looks like this. It's simpler, but again, you're going to lose the higher frequency parts of the calls and other information if you don't also examine the files under full spectrum, because you do lose information there, various different aspects of the files. So you can toggle it on and off just to look at the file, but I would recommend looking at each file under both under full spectrum and zero cross. So I generally leave it on this setting here where I have both full spectrum and zero cross. Just a note here, if you do need to change your full spectrum resolution, you can do that if it's a little bit fuzzy. So you do that by changing the fast Fourier transform or either FFT and then your window or win size settings. So if you're finding that your full spectrum is fuzzy or a bit cut off, you can increase your FFT and your win size. So you're just going to go up to File in your Kaleidoscope viewer window, and then you're going to go down to FFT settings. And then you can increase your FFT size and your win size as well. So just to note that your win size should always be about 50% or half of your FFT size, which you can see I have it set like that here. And then select OK when you're happy with your selection. Okay, so next to the toggle full spectrum button, you have the toggle zero cross button. So you have three options for this one. So I'm just going to turn the full spectrum off so you can see better. So here you have your zero cross. So this option is the call body option. Again, you can check our guide to find the definition of what the call body is. I'm not going to go through that in detail here. But here's the zero cross. So you can see each call or pulse. And then the part highlighted in purple is the call body. So by looking at it this way, I can see where the call body is within each pulse, which I find helpful. But you do not need to use that setting. So if you select that button, you can remove that. So you just see the full pulse all in white. It doesn't highlight the call body. This is the standard setting. And if you select that button again, you can actually turn your zero cross off. And what we're seeing here now is just the full spectrum. So this is what full spectrum looks like. So you have those three options. So to designate a file as a BAT pass and to do the manual ID, you have to use the zero cross pulse. So you should never be looking at the file just like this under full spectrum. It doesn't allow for ID of the file. So you should never be using this setting here, but if you want to use the zero cross call body option or the standard option, that's up to you, but you will have to at least use some form of zero cross when looking at your files. The next button here is your normal compressed time view toggle button. So this button will change between normal and compressed time view. So right now I am in normal time view, so you can see the button is spaced. So this is displaying the call sequence in real time, so how the call was actually recorded. So if I switch to compressed time view, and you can see the three lines are closer together, it actually compresses the file. So that is because it is removing the time between calls. So you can see here, let's go back to normal time view. In normal time view, you can see between this section and this section, there's quite a large space there. So I'm going to highlight that space so you can see what it looks like in compressed time. So let's go into compressed time now. And remember, there's a large gap here. The gap's gone, right? So it's removed the spaces between calls. So that's your compressed time view. So for compressed time view, this is why I didn't tell you the x-axis setting before, but in compressed time view, I generally keep it around 160 milliseconds. So this is how I keep it to look at calls. It allows for manual ID. You don't have to keep it exactly on 160 milliseconds, but you should ensure that your x-axis is standard between calls. So you're not changing it when you're actually IDing calls. You should keep that setting the same. So for whatever you choose, but I generally keep it around, you can see here, it's around 160 milliseconds. So, and that's in compressed time view. And then back in normal time view, it doesn't matter so much because the spacing is regular, or is normal, is how it would actually be. So make sure that you're looking at the sequence in normal time to get a full understanding of what is happening in the spectrogram. So looking at it in normal time will show you often if there's one bat there or two bats, or if there's something strange or different happening within the file. It's really important to look at the file with the spacing as it actually happens in real time. The compressed time view is what you will want to use for your species ID, because you can see I'm looking at the calls more, each pulse or call in more detail because it's more close up, and it shows me the shape of the call. In normal time view, which I'm in now, each call is a straight line. So I can't really say well, I can look at the frequency, but looking at the shape of the call, it doesn't really tell me anything about species ID. So I need to look at the calls in compressed time view to be able to ID the call. So you will toggle back and forth between this for each file. So you can also zoom in on the calls in normal time view. So now I'm in normal time view, and if I want, I can just keep zooming in forever. No, but I can keep zooming in to see the shape of the call. I should keep it around 160. So this way I can see the shape of the call, but the file, sorry, each pulse is spaced pretty far apart. So that makes it a little awkward for species ID. So I think it's easier and more consistent just to use this toggle button here to allow you to look at the calls close up for ID purposes. I'm just going back to 160 on the x-axis. So then you can just, you're looking at the call like this, you can go, okay, there's one bat there, great, switch, okay, looking here, scrolling through, and that way you can do your ID, and then you switch back and you switch to the next file. So I think that's the easiest way to do it. Just a note as well, so I'll see if I can show you in this file. Okay, so you can see in this file here, in your normal time view, you have a few pulses here that only show up in full spectrum, like that one there. See, it's only in green, there's no white or purple. Looking at the sequence here, it does look like that is still from a bat, but it wasn't strong enough to be recorded in zero cross, which is fine. You won't use that for ID, but it's good information to have. But see, I have that pulse in that little box there. But if we switch to compressed time, where did our box go? We lost our box. Let's try again. It looks like the whole box just disappears because you can't actually see those pulses in compressed time. You're only looking at the zero cross pulses. So if we put a square around this last zero cross pulse before these full spectrum only pulses, you can see it does show up now. That is our 0 cross pulse, and then you have another 0 cross pulse. So it's not showing those full spectrum only pulses in the middle. So just remember that 0 cross will only show you. So it might look a little different because it's only showing you the 0 cross pulses. Okay. And I don't think I showed you how to create a box like that. So it's just if you hold down your left mouse button and then drag it while still holding down the left mouse button and then let go, that creates a box. And then just left click for the box to disappear. So that's helpful. You can circle or put a square, I guess, around sections or around individual pulses, which makes it a little easier. So that is how you do that. Okay, the next button in our little sequence here is the toggle linear log frequency view. So this is just switching how you're looking at the spectrogram, whether it's in log or linear view. This is the standard setting I use here, just linear view. You don't need to be looking at the files in log view. So I would just leave that in linear view. Okay, so the next button is the toggle auto ID on and off. If you're only using the free version of the software, you can't even select this button because the free version does not come with auto ID capabilities. So you don't have to worry about that. If you have purchased Kaleidoscope software that has auto ID, you can use this button to turn the auto ID on and off. So right now it's off. I do have the purchase version of software, so I can show you what it looks like. So if you toggle the auto ID on, you can see you get these words at the top, which are all very closely spaced. But if you go into compressed time, you can see, so for each pulse, the auto ID software is making a guess at what that pulse would be. There's a question mark if it's unsure. Sometimes you'll see numbers next to the species because it's indicating that in its call library, it most closely resembles a pulse that is shaped like that particular number. So each species might have, you know, many different kinds of calls that each are given a different number. So you can see here that here it thinks it's northern Myotis, Myotis septentrionalis, and here this pulse it thinks is Myotis lucifugus or little brown Myotis. So it's going through, and then how it actually calculates auto ID is the species that it designates to the highest number or proportion of pulses, that is the species that the auto ID will assign. And it can sometimes assign like a backup or a runner-up species depending on the number. Yeah, so that can be helpful. We'll just turn that back off. And it should automatically close that, but it's not doing it right now, so I'll just reopen it. Okay, so your next button here is the Analyze View selection. So this is helpful. It opens a little window with several different calculations that we will be using for species ID. So many of these terms are described in more detail in the guide in section 4.7.1. So I'm not going to define them now. I'm just going to show you where they are. So just remember, when you're clicking on this button, it's going to calculate using the pulses on the screen only. So what I can see right now. So if I want to calculate for the whole file, I need to ensure that the whole file is in the window or the screen at the same time. So you can use this button here. And then if I select that Analyze button, okay, so here are the calculations for the whole file. So some of the ones you'll be wanting to look at are here, the SC, so slope of call body, the FC, or the characteristic frequency. You may also want the duration here. F max, the maximum frequency, and your F min, your minimum frequency. Those, I think, are the main ones that you'd be using for when species ID. So that is how you find them, and then you can just close that window there. If you do want to look at those numbers for a specific pulse, you just put your little box around it again, click on the button, and then you can see these values are different. So this can be useful if you're looking at a file, but there's a certain part of the file like you don't want to capture for ID purposes. So maybe like here where the calls are closest together, that's possibly an approach phase, which we won't talk about now, but we want to look at the search phase part of the call, so we don't want to calculate, use those pulses in our calculations. So you can draw a box around this part of the file and then click on that button, and that would be a more accurate representation of those numbers for species ID purposes. So you can play around with that. You can also go back to your compressed time view, make sure your axis is where you want it again, and then, you know, select a certain pulse or a certain section of the sequence, and then you can use that button again. So you'll be using that button a lot, so please familiarize yourself with that. And so just to note, again, just to highlight that some of these numbers can be inaccurate depending on the quality of the pulses. So for instance, the slope could show up as negative when you're looking at these pulses and you know that it's not a negative slope. You shouldn't have a negative slope. So if the slope is negative, that's indicating that the quality of the pulses used in the calculation are poor. And so you'll want to ensure that you're using good quality pulses to get an idea of those numbers. So really just keep that in mind. Like, you'll want numbers that actually make sense for what you're looking at. Okay, so it's particularly important for the slope, I find. So just keep an eye on that, and it should never be a negative number. Okay, just gonna go back into normal time view. Okay, so the next button here is toggle show hide your metadata panel. So it's just the metadata panel is this full panel section down here, which you can see. So for some reason you don't want to see that, you can hide it, and then you can see more of your call on the screen. There you go. To me, I find that kind of stretches the sequence out a little bit, but if that's what you're used to or you'd like to use, if you think it makes sense to look at the files that way, that's fine. The only thing is when you are manually IDing these files, you will be using these buttons down here to assign manual ID, and so it makes more sense to have that metadata panel open. But the option is there if you want to use it. This next button here is play sound. This is a pretty cool feature. It allows you to actually audibly play back the spectrogram. So to hear the recording in real time, but at a lower frequency so it is audible, you can select the normal setting here from the drop down on the right, and then you'll click the play arrow. So again, it will play whatever is visible in the screen here, unless you have a box set, and then it will play what's in the box. So just keep that in mind. So if I press play, okay, so that's in normal playback mode. So all you can hear really is some noise there in the background. And that's because it's too fast for us to be able to hear back calls. But it is useful to use the normal function because sometimes it can be indicative if there's an insect or another object creating noise in the file, like we just heard that noise. It can be useful to sometimes screen for those kinds of things. So to slow down the back call so it is audible for humans, you can select either the 1/8 or 1/16 option generally. I use 1/16 personally. So here we go. So by adjusting this button here, I'm just removing some of that background noise from the file. So you can do that if you want to try to make it a little cleaner. So the sequence will always play from the beginning of the screen. And you can hear there are some chirps in there that aren't showing up in zero cross. That would be these ones here. And all that noise is what you see here at the bottom of the screen. So it's a poor file in terms of noise. But those chirps are your bat calls. Okay, so we'll just stop that. We're gonna go into compressed time. So just remember in compressed time, everything is compressed. So the call will be faster. So I'll just show you, I'll draw a box around. Woo. So it's removed all the time between calls, so it's a lot faster. So typically if I'm listening to a file, I will listen to it in normal time, so it's not that fast. It better allows me to hear what's going on in the file. So yeah, and you can even just select a specific pulse if you want. There you go. So that's how to use the playback or the play sound option. I'll just put this back here so we can see. There we go. So your next button here is your time expansion factor button. You don't have to worry about that or what it means. You can typically just keep it on auto. This next button here with mono is the microphone channel. So it's grayed out. I can't select this drop down, and that's because in the converter window, I told the software that I only use one microphone. So because I only use one microphone, I only have the mono or one microphone option here. But if you did use more than one microphone channel for recording, which is a possibility on the SM3 detector model, you would change this in Kaleidoscope in the converter window before looking at the files, and then you'll have other options from the drop down here. Okay, next you have these arrow buttons here. So the single line arrow buttons will allow you to switch between acoustic files within the same folder. And you can see it says go to next file or go to previous file. So if I click on the right single line arrow, I go to the next file within that file folder. And the left arrow button allows me to go back to the previous file. So you can change between files that way. Alternatively, and this is a little bit faster, if you click on the spectrogram, like right click, you can also use the arrow buttons on your keyboard to switch between files. So press the bottom arrow on the keyboard to go to the next file. And the top arrow button allows you to go back to the previous file. So you can switch between files that way. If I am not clicked on the spectrogram, if I'm clicked down here somewhere, I'm not able, because you can see I'm actually moving through this blue box here. Or if I'm clicked here, I'm actually changing that slider. So you'll want to make sure that you have to right click on the spectrogram before you can switch between files in that way. So the double line arrows allow you to switch between subfolders within an overall folder. So I have some subfolders here, so I'm able to switch. Oh, I have no subfolders. It's just reloading the same file. But if you did have subfolders, so often when we take the data and put it on the computer, the software, we have it set to break down the recordings by recording night. So if at one site you have 7 recording nights, those are, each night is a subfolder within your folder. So once you get to the last file within one night, you can press this double arrow button to go to the next folder, the next recording night, and start looking at files in that folder. So that can be really handy to switch between the back and forth between folders at a single site, even when they're broken down by monitoring night. Okay. So that was your very quick introduction to Kaleidoscope software. The best way you can learn is really by opening files and starting to play around with some of the settings. If you're pressing things start to look really weird, you're not sure what to do, the best thing to do is just reset. So put everything back to like the standard setting. Make sure you're back in normal time. Press the square to get the whole file within the screen. Start from the beginning again. And then that's when you can start, making the changes that will allow you to better look at the file. And once you select the settings you want and you place things where you want, as long as you don't close the Kaleidoscope viewer window, those settings will stay in place. So even if I'm not there, if I have it on 160 and I'm switching between files and then I want to look at it again in compressed time, it stays at around the same. So really you're not having to play too much with any of these buttons once you get started looking at files, other than switching between normal and compressed time, and then maybe using your analyze button. Those would be the two that you'd really be using for each file. Okay, great, thank you. I hope that was helpful.